Hi there, it's Ron Gula from Gula Tech Adventures, and today we're talking about how to evaluate the secure by design efficacy of the vendor that you want to deal with. Now, today in 2024, we've got a lot of guidance from the White House, NIST, CISA, the FBI on how you should code and how you should kind of operate your tech startups. We've even had this administration talk about device security labels, which I think is a great idea. But right now, today, if you walk into Best Buy or you're browsing devices on Amazon, it's really hard to kind of figure out which of these companies and vendors is doing a great job or not a great job. Now, just as a refresher, if you're looking at a device, or every device that we talk about today that's connected to the internet probably has a cloud component. So whether you're looking at a hardware device or a SaaS device, every solution you're going to look at is going to have some basically variability of code that's on that device and code that's in the cloud. And a lot of the verbiage that we read about secure by design is all about making sure that that device that you get, that when you get it, it doesn't have any vulnerabilities. It's got the most basic security settings. You don't have to turn on security and that sort of thing. And basically that if there are vulnerabilities in the field, it's going to patch itself. Now, this sounds like a great thing. It definitely moves the needle if more vendors do that, but it doesn't solve some of the major problems that we have right now in 2024, which is what happens if the vendor itself gets compromised. And we had a lot of high profile attacks that are out there, and it's really hard to actually understand which vendors are doing a great job and not a great job. Case in point, if you look at the MGM and Caesars, casino, the story is, those guys got hacked. But if you read the news and the data behind them, there's a lot of flat networks and there's a lot of questionable security practices. What about all the other casinos that didn't get hacked? Did they have two-factor authentication? Did they ban BYOD devices? Do they have segmented networks? My guess is yes. And unfortunately, you're not going to hear people talk about how they operate their organizations by security. So what can you do? Well, first of all, if you're looking at a company, you can look at the history of the company. Does the company have a history of vulnerabilities? Is there a way you can look at it and see if they've had vulnerabilities that have been discovered and have they fixed those vulnerabilities? Are there CVEs for these things? Now, you're never going to get a CVE for a SaaS vendor like Salesforce or Microsoft, but you can actually get a lot of information about those SaaS services, how they responded to vulnerabilities if you do that research. Now, the second thing is, can you get some sort of information about the company directly from the company? And the answer is yes. So today, if you're working with a small company, a small tech startup that's collecting data, it probably has a portal based on Drata or Vanta where they will probably tell you under NDA, or perhaps just they give this to customers under the customer portal, what their overall status is from a government, a GRC type of point of view, governance, regulation, compliance. And basically, it's sort of like a real-time uptime of how those companies are doing. Again, this is a great form of transparency. It doesn't really get into the weeds of how the company is really running their IT and their development and that sort of thing. But we'll talk about how you can get there in another way. Well, that other way is you can actually read the end user license agreement for whether that's the hardware component or the software cloud component of the thing that you're buying. There's a lot of chatter on Reddit. There's a lot of chatter. There's even companies that we've been pitched at Gula Tech Adventures that track small changes to end user license agreements, which indicate dramatic changes in how these vendors collect and store data on the back end. I think it was pretty famous. You can ask ChatGPT to read a EULA for somebody and ask it like, can the people at Evernote see my notes? Can the people at Dropbox see my paper notes? And it's really interesting what is put in there and what isn't put in there. And it really makes you question, when you have data going into the cloud, going into these SaaS applications, they might make a statement like, we don't read your email, but maybe they collect the device you're sending it from, the email address that you're coming from and going to, and that sort of thing. And, that's the kind of data that you really need to understand what is being collected for in these end user license agreements. Now, if you have a sense of what data is being called out in the end user license agreement, you really have a sense of understanding if you can get a chance to talk to these vendors and ask a question about what are they doing to secure that network. Now, if you read the CISA guidance on secure by design, a lot of it is focused again on secure configs and fixing vulnerabilities and do that. But they do have this comment about defense in depth. They don't really go into it a whole lot, but I'm going to tell you, I've done a lot of diligence with startups. I've done a lot of diligence with vendors that we've used. And these conversations really go two different ways. If you get the chance to talk to a potential vendor that you're using for SaaS or for your IoT devices, you're going to ask them, look, how do you run that back-end network? What are your core components? I had a conversation recently where I was expecting not a lot of great answers. I was expecting sort of cyber hygiene on top of the entire developers and a flat network. And what I ended up getting was a very, very secure, Lambda, all customers' data encrypted. Nobody ever sees customer data unless the customer asks them to look at something. No developer can get to customer data, that sort of thing. If that's what you're dealing with, what's next? Well, what's next is what happens if a developer commits malicious code, and do they have policies and procedures to do that? A lot of these things never end, but these are the kind of conversations you want to have with your vendors. Now, what happens if you have a great vendor and they've got one flat network, right? It's role-based access control database and storage, role-based access control to the cloud. Everybody has an endpoint with an EDR on it, some sort of two-factor authentication, check, 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 all the buzzwords. Well, that can be hacked, right? All of those things can be bypassed. A lot of companies who do hygiene, they have bad days too. And if you're going to depend upon that company, maybe they really need to be thinking about, doing architecturally things that are a lot different and moving on. A lot of times when I select vendors, you kind of assume everybody's going to have a bad day, and the more secure one is going to be the simpler one who has done the engineering up front to prevent lateral movement, prevent movement within these applications, prevent, access of the data that's being stored. Now, unfortunately, there's no magic list of questions where you can go and you can have these sort of conversations, or they're even going to put this on a website, right? Secure by design in the details is not something we talk about. And it's something I encourage people to talk about. But if we can't talk about it publicly, we should at least be able to talk about it privately, especially if you're having a business relationship as a vendor and you're a customer to these people. So if you're looking at SaaS and IoT solutions, you're trying to see if they're secure or not. Like I said, see if they've had a history of CVEs. See if they've had a history of, maybe on the CVE side, do they even have a bug submission program? Like that's always a good way to look at that. If you're a customer, can you see what their GRC status is? Do they have clear, transparent controls? Vanta, Drata, there's a lot of other GRC companies that help small tech companies kind of share that kind of stuff. Have you read their end user license agreement? And then finally, have you actually had a conversation with their chief privacy officer, chief data officer, the chief risk officer, security officer, that sort of thing? Once you have all that information, you should be able to make a judgment if you're basing a decision on security, if these people are doing a good job or not. And of course, if they're doing a good job and you've done that homework, there's a lot of ways you can share that information without giving up their secrets that are defending from the hackers. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more stuff like this, give us a like and a subscribe here on YouTube. I'm Ron Gula. Have a great day.